Hello, America, and welcome to the 9th episode of the American Restraint podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Trepanier, and I'm excited to continue on this journey with you. Okay, before we get going, just a little recap for those of you who are new to the show. This is a podcast about how to fix America. It is largely based on my recent book, American Restraint. You see, I believe the country is fundamentally divided, and that the forces of hyper-individualism and hyper-capitalism are largely to blame. And the fix is federalism. As usual, I ask for your ratings, review, subscription, comments, and sharing this podcast. It really helps get the word out about the show. And I do have a special promotional shout out today. I have a Goodreads giveaway this month for my book. You can go to the Goodreads website, search for American Restraint, and enter the giveaway. I'll also leave the link in the show notes. And then one last note here. I just wanted to mention that summer is here where I live in the Rocky Mountains. Summer's here. It's warm. That's why I've got the Hawaiian shirt going. I'm originally from San Diego. Lots of palm trees in San Diego. So anyway, hope you can enjoy a little bit of the aloha spirit that I'm trying to bring your way today. Today's episode is a follow-up to last week's top 10 list on why we need an Article 5 convention now to fix America. Today, we're going to discuss why an Article 5 convention is the only option to fix America, mostly because the other alternatives just won't work. So I call this episode A Progressive Paradise, a Libertarian Atlantis, and other thought experiments on how to fix America. Okay, let's go. First, a quick story. During a break from college, I was a full-time missionary for my church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in Japan for a couple of years. This experience was transformational for me. In addition to becoming fluent in Japanese and learning to love Japanese culture, people, and history, I also learned to better appreciate the strengths and weaknesses of America by living in a foreign country. I've come to the point of view that my ideal country is kind of halfway between Japan, more community-oriented, and America, more individualistic-oriented. Through active church and community service over the past 3 decades, I have also come to be much more communitarian and service-oriented in our increasingly hyper-individualistic and hyper-capitalist country. I think that making these types of comparisons between countries or systems are helpful as we try to figure out the best way to fix America. So, last episode, we talked about why Article 5 is the only option to fix America. To draw that point out, we're going to spend some more time on this episode talking about some of those different options, kind of as thought experiments. I really believe in the power of contrasts. That's why I enjoy looking at how different countries work. I'm a political science geek. I love looking at history and contemporary societies to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And as we've talked about before on the show, 80% of Americans believe the country is on the wrong track. 80% of Americans don't believe that the country works right now. So, today, we're going to look a little more broadly at the statement I made last week that the Article 5 convention is the only option for fixing America. We're going to evaluate that statement by looking closely at the alternatives. We'll do a few thought experiments for some of the main alternatives being proposed for how to fix America. We'll also discuss the pros and cons of these thought experiments. The center cannot hold. So before we talk about the far left, the right, and the far right, I think it's important to get grounded in the center. We've talked before on this show about how the center is what has traditionally given America its strength and resilience. The middle class used to hold together the fabric of American society by virtue of its adherence to basic virtues like family, church, community, thrift, shared sacrifice, and love of country. But the problem is that America has changed dramatically over the last 50 years. We don't share much in common anymore. We have radically different views of our history, our most important current problems, and our future. American culture used to be more centrist in its political and cultural outlook, but our culture has become unmoored as social media, cable news, and elite opinion leaders have fomented divisiveness. So without a strong center in America, there's no way to absorb the natural tension that comes from extremes on the right and the left. Something is seriously wrong in America, and it's structural. We've talked about the structural problems in America before. They're due to hyper-individualism and hyper-capitalism. Okay, so our first thought experiment, I'll call it a progressive paradise. What's the theme? America is hopelessly, racist, sexist, homophobic, and more government intervention is necessary. Also, a theme could be, but what about my needs? The ideal president for a progressive paradise is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. What are they for? Anything pro-hyper-individualism, abortion without limits, sexual liberation without limits, #resistance, drugs without limits, open borders, #climate justice. Also, therefore, a government that believes that more funding is the answer to every issue. Reparations. What are they against? Limits to any speech that hurts my feelings. They're against organized religion. They're definitely against straight white males. The police. #oligarchs. They're against mostly billionaires who vote Republican, but of course they're totally cool with billionaires like Soros and Pritzker who support them. They're against Trump and anyone who dares speak his name. Okay, so in this thought experiment, why the progressive paradise won't work? So many reasons, so little money. According to a recent Pew survey, they only represent about 10% of American adults. You simply can't run a national government on an extreme platform that 90% of Americans can't get behind. But with federalism, if progressives want to try out their paradise in Oregon or Washington, I think those states should have the ability to do this. Okay, thought experiment number 2. I call this one a Libertarian Atlantis. If you read Ayn Rand, you probably get the Atlantis reference. What's the theme? No rules on capitalism means that everyone will be a lonely millionaire. Who's the ideal president? Chase Oliver. Who's that? Exactly my point. Actually, he ran for president last year against Trump and Harris, and still, no one knows who he is. What are the libertarians for? Anything pro-hyper-capitalism. Also, many of the same positions as the progressives, hyper-individualists, in terms of open borders, sexual liberation without limits, pro-porn, pro-gambling, pro-drug legalization, pro-prostitution, or sex workers. Therefore, lowering the drinking age to 18. But what are they against? They're against taxes of almost any form. Government marriage licenses, the death penalty, almost any form of regulation, especially regulations like antitrust against big business and Wall Street financial regulations. They're against most international alliances and the military-industrial complex. Why the Libertarian Atlantis won't work? So many reasons, so few friends. At its core, libertarianism believes that no one owes anyone anything. Ayn Rand famously put selfishness at the center of her libertarian philosophy, but we live in families, communities, and nations for a reason. According to a recent Pew survey, libertarians only represent about 10% of American adults. Just like the progressive paradise, you simply can't run a national government on an extreme platform that 90% of Americans can't get behind. But, again, with federalism, if libertarians want to try out their paradise in Montana or New Hampshire, sorry, I should say, if the libertarians want to try out their Atlantis in Montana or New Hampshire, I think those states should have the ability to do this. Okay, the third thought experiment, the status quo, head in the sand land theme. We know things are pretty bad, but we fear change is the theme here. We just need better leaders, and everyone needs to learn to get along again in order to fix America. The ideal president for this group, any moderate not named Trump or AOC. What are they for? Economic growth? They're okay with some socially liberal causes. They moderately support a strong America. They support many government programs, even if they are too expensive or not necessarily constitutional. They're pro-recycling. They're pro-everything going back to normal. What are they against? They're wary of too many foreign wars and reports of police brutality. They're against social justice riots. They hate inflation, unemployment, and 401k wild swings. They're against most forms of climate justice action. They're against political change that seems extreme. Lots of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Why the status quo, head in the sand land won't work. Simply put, the status quo just doesn't work anymore. The center is too small. So many things are broken in America, including our morals, our economy, our federal government, and they won't go back to normal by sticking our heads in the sand. Just like their 401k plans, these Americans want a no-risk, high-reward approach to change in America's government. This group will be one of the hardest to convince to support Article 5 because even though they likely want a more effective government and less hyper-individualism and hyper-capitalism, they have too much fear, uncertainty, and doubt for the change we need. Okay, what's the fourth thought experiment? I call this one Zombie Reaganism City on a Hill theme. Zombie Reaganism City on a Hill. What's the theme here? We just need to bring back the good old GOP. Who's the ideal president? Mitch McConnell. What are they for? Anything that Reagan was for in the 1980s. Strong defense, free markets, strong economy, strong free speech rights, one nation under God. Even though this group very much distastes Trump and his antics, they are lifelong members of the Republican Party, and they will vote for Trump as long as it leads to lower taxes and more law and order. What are they against? Communism, Islamic terrorism, illegal immigration, unless, of course, this impacts their lawn care, child care, other illegal immigrant dependent costs. Most regulations they're against. They're definitely against the Democratic Party, especially the progressive wing. Why zombie Reaganism won't work? Reagan isn't president anymore. This isn't the 1980s anymore. As much as I miss the music then, many zombie Reaganism City on the Hill supporters don't understand that trickle-down economics doesn't work for 90% of Americans. This group is probably also most likely to believe that if we just get a less Trumpy Republican in the White House, then we can call it Morning America, Morning in America again. They don't realize that there are probably 70 to 80% of Americans who don't see the world the way they do. But again, with federalism, if Arizona, Ohio, and North Carolina, these types of states want to bring back zombie Reaganism, city on a hill principles, they should be allowed to do so. Okay, now to our last thought experiment. Article 5, Convention Promised Land. What's the theme? Let's fix America with federalism. Who's the ideal president? Rick Santorum, one of the major spokesmen of Convention of States. What are they for? an Article 5 convention that adds the following 3 amendments to the Constitution: term limits for Congress, a balanced budget amendment, and reduction in the size and scope of the federal government. What are they against? An out-of-control Congress with millionaire swamp creatures like Pelosi, Schumer, and McConnell. An out-of-control budget that adds trillions and trillions of dollars in debt and raises the cost of living for every American today and in the future. An out-of-control federal government that needs to be restrained, a la the 10th Amendment. Why an Article 5 solution is the only way to fix America. We need restraint, America. Hyper-individualism and hyper-capitalism are the structural reasons that America is undone. And none of the other solutions above work at the national level. Biden didn't have the support of even half of America. And he wasn't even the president, now we've come to find out. At least many of us knew, but I think everyone now knows he wasn't running the show. And Trump will never have support of half of Americans. Remember, 90 million voters didn't vote in 2024. And each of the other solutions above only represent about 10 to 20% of Americans. There are no more majority solutions that will fix our broken country. Federalism represents the last best hope. Let's have an Article 5 convention now. And then let California be California. Let Idaho be Idaho. And let New Hampshire be New Hampshire. A one-size-fits-all mentality cannot solve all of America's problems. The states were designed to be laboratories of innovation and experimentation to get our country on the right track again. Okay, last thing, I wanted to share some lyrics from another great 80s song by Howard Jones that hopefully will kind of carry us out on this episode. The song was "Things Can Only Get Better." We're not scared to lose it all, security thrown down the wall. Future dreams we have to realize. 1,000 skeptic hands won't keep us from the things we plan unless we're clinging to the things we prize. And do you feel scared? I do. But I won't stop and falter. And if we threw it all away, things can only get better. All right, America, that's it for the thought experiments today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. There are obviously a few more out there, but the point is still the same. We can't govern this giant country of 340 million people on an idea that only 10 to 20% of the people can get behind. It just doesn't work. And it leads to much more infighting and contention in the country. I'm a peaceful, optimistic guy. And that's why I like to look to solutions, like Article 5. Have a great day, and remember to enter the Goodreads Giveaway. Things can only get better. Aloha.